When I covered the wreck of Japan's heavy cruiser Aoba, I noted something about her service. Namely that this ship is an interesting one. She can be viewed at the same time as Japan's luckiest or unluckiest cruiser. It depends on your perspective on her battle damage. This was a ship that repeatedly got beaten up, from the night battles off Guadalcanal to bombing raids and submarine attack. That Aoba survived nearly to the end is something of a miracle. Now, was she lucky for surviving, or unlucky for the damage? Alternatively, was Aoba just a grizzled survivor? I'll leave that to the audience to decide. For now, let's look at Aoba's story in more detail. This is a story that began without much fanfare, when a new cruiser was laid down on January 23, 1924. The ship was then launched on September 25, 1926, before being commissioned on September 20th, 1927. Let's look at what the Japanese got out of Aoba. This was an interesting case because this ship was originally intended as a different design. Aoba and her sister ship Kinugasa were originally intended as Furutaka-class cruisers, which were a bit of an anachronistic design with 6 single semi-turrets. Aoba was, as a result, redesigned. The cruiser would ditch the single turrets in favor of 3 twin turrets. Still 6 guns, but in a more sensible layout, in addition to changes to the bridge structure and the fitting of aircraft handling equipment behind the aft superstructure. While Furutaka would later swap to a similar gun layout, there were still differences in the bridge and catapult area, the easiest way to tell the cruisers apart, along with a much slimmer second funnel on Furutaka compared to Aoba. With those differences in mind, it's time to look at the details of the design. First, the displacement. This came out to around 7,000 tons at the standard loading, with this going up to around 9,000 to 10,000 at the full load, depending on the source. On that displacement, Aoba carried the aforementioned 3 twin turrets. These each carried 2 20cm, 7.9-inch guns for a total of 6 barrels, with 2 turrets in a super-firing pair on the bow, and the 3rd turret on the stern. To support those, Aoba also carried 4 12cm, 4.7-inch dual-purpose guns, with a pair on either broadside clustered around the funnels. The final weaponry, meanwhile, consisted of 12 24-inch torpedo tubes and 6 twin mounts. These were fixed pairs mounted in the hull. Next, we have the armor protection. This was on the lighter end with a 76mm 3-inch main belt, and only 35mm 1.4 inches on the deck. Not the most impressive armor, but pretty in line with other cruisers of the time. You could say the same for the speed. 34 knots was, admittedly, on the higher end, but it wasn't massively higher than the average of 30 to 33 knots. Aoba managed this speed on 102,000 shaft horsepower through 4 shafts. And with that done, we can wrap up the design detail for the moment. There will be a set of modernizations later, but we'll cover that when it comes up. For now, we can return to service history. As said, this began on September 20th, 1927. However, it would be some time before the ship had much excitement. Like most ships in the 1920s, there wasn't much for Aoba to do. From 1927 through to 1929, the ship trained and joined fleet reviews. The first major change came in January 1929 with a short overhaul. Among other things, this saw the ship fitted with a gunpowder-powered catapult. However, even this was just a short break. By March of 1929, the cruiser was back in the water, although not much would really change when it came to service. This remained on training through the mid-1930s. From 1929 through early 1936, there wasn't much to make Aoba stand out. She even seems to have missed the Fourth Fleet incident in 1935. A boring life is one the crew was probably fine with. This only changed in late 1936, specifically on August 14, 1936. Aoba would collide with her sister ship, Kinugasa. Apparently, the crew missed a signal and grazed the other cruiser at around 9 knots. Fortunately, between the low speed and the fact it was a grazing blow, damage was minimal for both ships. In fact, by late October, both cruisers were able to participate in another fleet review. This did, however, wrap up her service in the 1930s. Aoba would be temporarily assigned to the Kure Guard Squadron on December 1st of 1936. This would only last until August 15th, 1937. At that point, the cruiser was put into reserve for modernization, a modernization that began in November 1938 and ran through October of 1940. This was quite an extensive rebuild, all things being equal. The most distinctive change came to the superstructure. For example, the bridge was reworked a bit to bring it more in line with the modernized Furutaka. The aft superstructure, on the other hand, changed substantially. The old aircraft hangar was removed, replaced instead by a flat platform and a new crane. This platform extended forward around the number 2 funnel. Part of it was dedicated to reloading torpedoes, as I'll touch on in a moment. First, the last structural modification. It involved bulges fitted to the hull to provide added stability. The added weight up top necessitated this work, and not just from superstructure changes, but also from weaponry. The first major change there came in the main battery. This remained 3 turrets with 2 guns each. However, the guns were replaced. All the Japanese heavy cruisers saw their old 20cm guns replaced by new 203mm or 8-inch weapons. On the other hand, the secondary battery remained the same. Still 4 guns, still the old 12cm 4.7-inch weapons. Although the cruiser also picked up 25mm guns to marginally improve anti-aircraft defense. A more notable change came with the torpedoes. Gone were the old fixed mounts, replaced by 2 quadruple mounts on the deck, 8 tubes in all. These were mounted beneath the new platform between the funnels and catapult, with torpedo reload mechanisms ahead of them. That rounds off the major changes, so we can return to Aoba's story. Her modernization concluded on October 30th of 1940, although the ship only properly returned to service after a new set of sea trials. As such, Aoba's proper return to the fleet came on November 15th, where she would enjoy one last bit of peacetime service from late 1940 through late 1941, until ultimately Aoba would depart Japan on November 30th, 1941. This saw her sail first to the Bonin Islands, where she was stationed on December 2nd. There she joined up with Kinugasa, Furutaka, and Kakao, Japan's oldest heavy cruisers, operating as a mostly homogeneous unit, which in this case was assigned to support the invasion of Guam. They stuck around as the Japanese troops stormed ashore on December 10th. But in the lack of proper resistance, the cruisers departed later the same day. They left Fort Truk for a short break. This was short because on December 13th, they left to support the second assault on Wake Island, an assault that concluded on December 23rd, 1941, at which point the cruisers were shifted to the South Pacific to support the invasion of New Britain and New Ireland. This operation began on January 23rd of 1942. during which an Australian PBY Catalina was shot down by a Zero off of Shokaku. 4 of that plane's crew made it into the water, where they were picked up by Aoba. Near as I can tell, they were treated well by the cruiser's crew, and then dropped off ashore on January 26th after Rabaul was captured. Following this, the ship bounced between Japanese holdings for a couple months. Her next combat action wouldn't come until the invasion of Lae and Salamaua on March 8, 1942, followed up by supporting the landings on Bougainville on March 31st. Then nothing of note until another landing operation on May 3rd of 1942, this time to Lagi as part of the larger Operation MO, which of course resulted in the Battle of the Coral Sea. However, Aoba was not directly engaged during this action, aside from an ineffectual bombing run by B-17s on May 6th. Despite being near Shoho on May 7th, Aoba avoided real attack. She was also too far away to provide real cover for the carrier. Although Shoho was attacked by such overwhelming force, it's debatable Aoba could have done much. After this, the summer of 1942 was more bouncing between ports. It wouldn't be until August that Aoba returned to the front line, in this case back in the Solomons for the actions off Guadalcanal, where Aoba would see both success and her first major damage. The success came on August 9, 1942, in the Battle of Savo Island, where Japanese cruisers smashed an Allied formation. Aoba, meanwhile, only suffered 1 hit, making her the least damaged of the 3 Japanese cruisers hit. That would change in devastating fashion with her next engagement. Aoba spent August on transport runs and shore bombardment, and likely September as well. All of this leading up to the next major surface action, the Battle of Cape Esperance. This began as another escort and shore bombardment mission. It would end in a crushing American victory. At around 10:30 p.m. on October 11th, 1942, the Japanese cruiser formation was ambushed by an American formation. Under the command of Norman Scott, this group crossed the Japanese T, meaning the American ships could bring all their firepower to bear, while the Japanese could only use their bow turrets. As for Aoba, she was the flagship of the Japanese formation. The commanding officer, Aritomo Goto, was completely shocked by the sudden fire. He believed that it was friendly fire because the Japanese didn't realize the American fleet was so close. He had even used signal lamps right before the shelling began, despite the lookouts reporting the fleet as American. Once the fighting began, Goto ordered a sharp turn. This only succeeded in exposing the Japanese broadside. Aoba would be hit by up to 40 6- and 8-inch shells as a result. These wrecked the bridge, mortally wounding Goto, as well as disabling the number 2 turret, and outright destroying the number 3 turret. 4 of the ship's boilers were also put out of action. With such severe damage, Aoba was forced to withdraw. Fortunately for the remaining crew, the ship managed to escape, despite losing 80 crewmen. As could be expected, this kind of damage required a lengthy period in dock. Aoba, after emergency repair work, arrived back in Japan on October 22nd. There, the ship would have the number 3 turret removed, with the barbette plated over and fitted with a triple 25mm gun mount. This, along with the repairs, kept the ship in Japan until February 15th of 1943. When that was done, the cruiser returned to the Solomons by March 2nd. Her time here would, however, be fairly short. On April 3rd, while moored in New Ireland, B-17s attacked the cruiser. They managed a direct hit that detonated 2 of Aoba's torpedoes. This set massive fires and forced the ship to be beached to avoid sinking. Aoba would require yet more repair work. Emergency repairs were performed in port from April 3rd to the 20th, before further repairs at Truk on April 25th, 1943. 3 months later, on July 25th, Aoba sailed to Japan, arriving on August 1st for proper repairs. This would keep her in dock until November 24th of 1943, where the number 3 turret was put back in place, along with radar and more 25mm guns. However, her power plant couldn't be fully repaired, so the ship was limited to 25 knots. This wouldn't impact her following service, at least not very much. Aoba would spend the rest of 1943 and much of 1944 on various transport and training runs, taking her from the Indian Ocean to the East Indies and anywhere in between, during which a black mark came when her commanding officer, Admiral Sakonjo, ordered the execution of POWs aboard Tone on March 18, 1944. After this, Aoba would continue on her duties, with a moment of excitement on April 23rd. The destroyer Amagiri hit a mine. This would sink the destroyer, with 180 survivors picked up by Aoba and another cruiser. Those men were dropped off ashore on April 24th. More transport work followed, with Aoba continuing on this pattern for the rest of her active service. There isn't much of note for this period, just a list of transport runs to bits of the Japanese Empire. Until, that is, October 23rd of 1944, when Aoba was hit by a torpedo from USS Bream. This hit the number 2 engine room, causing severe flooding, ultimately reaching a 13-degree list to starboard. Aoba would be towed to Manila for emergency repairs, during which she was attacked by carrier aircraft. Those failed to hit the ship, so Aoba was able to depart Manila on November 5th, 1944. Despite multiple attempts by submarines, she avoided any further damage, until ultimately arriving in Japan on December 12th, where the Japanese declared her irreparable. Aoba would be moored in Kure, where she remained for the rest of the war. This would see the cruiser attacked on April 24th, 1945. She was sunk by this attack, but the Japanese brought the cruiser back up, if only to slap more 25mm guns on her and moor the cruiser as a floating anti-aircraft battery, where she was attacked again on July 24th, and sunk for a final time, coming to rest on the bottom with a starboard list. However, even this wasn't enough for the American pilots. Aoba would be hit again on July 28th, adding up to 8 bomb hits, 4 from carrier aircraft and 4 from B-24s. Those last hits blew off her stern past the number 3 turret. After this, Aoba was left in place, until ultimately being raised in November of 1946, to be towed off for scrapping, an unremarkable end to a remarkable tale of survival. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.